This is NZG's model of the Liebherr LTM 1250 mobile crane, and as the numbering suggests, it's got a maximum capacity of 250 tonnes, and it is a 5-axle crane. This version is a limited edition, and it's in the colours of the Austrian company Felbermayr. The packaging is very high quality and all of the parts are wrapped in soft paper, and there's even a leaflet that tells you the best way to get the model out of the box. So with that information, we carefully lift it out using a couple of giant hand cranes. Included is a nice instruction manual, and it seems to be slightly updated from the first version of the model. And it's got nice clear pictures and diagrams explaining how to assemble the various parts. And it's nice to see that that also includes reeving diagrams. This is a limited edition, and it's pleasing to see that it also comes with a numbered collector card. This version of the model is different from the first version that we saw a few years back, and that's because small parts like mirrors have to be fitted to the model. They are a bit loose fitting, but in this case it probably is okay to glue them, and that's because the packaging of the box has been designed for the model to have the mirrors fitted, so if you did glue the parts you could put the model back in the box if you needed to. In addition to the mirrors, there are a couple of beacon lights which need to be fitted at the rear, and again a touch of glue will secure them. Next we need to reeve a hook, so we need to free the rope, and that has been tied on for shipping. Once we cut that, we can then use the key into the winch drum and run off some rope and run it to the front. With the magic that is cranes etc, here's the hook already reeved on, but the model doesn't have a proper tying on point, so we've made one up here using a piece of chain. The Fly Jib is shipped as 3 separate parts, so we need to join those up, and that's nice to do because the parts fit well together. The final connections are made by using tiny brass nuts and bolts, and to make that easy, a couple of tools are provided. And as always, the only thing to avoid is doing them up too tight. So here is the jib in its fully assembled form, and it's ready to be attached to the side of the crane. Out of the box though, the guide wheel is in the up position, and for transport it needs to be lowered by undoing the screw. And by doing that you reduce the overall headroom required by the vehicle. So we're ready to hang the fly jib on the side, and the first thing to do is to fit 3 brackets. These are plastic with an excellent colour match, and they slot into the side of the boom. Now we can hang the fly jib in place, and it's a little bit tricky to get in the right position, but once you get it there, it clips nicely and firmly in position. Out of the box there are a couple more things to fit, and these are the jacks which screw into the back, and they're used to lift the counterweight. Starting underneath, the chassis is very detailed and there are transmission components to the driven axles, although they are not all fully joined up, so you can see some gaps between them, but the wheels and tyres are of high quality. The cab looks very nice with its sharp graphics, and there's also a realistic number plate. There's also a Felbermayr fleet number on the door. While we're at the front, the boom head has metal pulleys on a sliding axle, and the hook is also a nicely made metal part. Looking behind the cab there are some more nice graphics, including some tiny ones, and they add to the realistic appearance. The exhaust also has a nice etched finish. There are also some very fine casting details on the boom, such as these pipes. There are fixed ladders on the carrier deck, and smaller details such as the door handles are convincing. The grab rails on the cab are stiff plastic, and the rest of the ladders and handrails are metal. Another very nice touch on the model are the soft rubber skirts. At the back we see some more nice detailing, and that includes a realistic number plate and some painted lights. Looking from above, the walkways have textured surfaces, and the fly jib is nearly all metal, with any plastic parts having an excellent colour match. The counterweight also looks good with its very sharp graphics, and the lifting points are all denoted in the casting. The main boom ram on this model is of plastic, but the detailing is good, including hoses and pipes. The finish of the telescopic sections is also very high. We start with the crane on its back, and the first thing to see is the independent suspension on each of the axles. They also have their own steering with a decent range of movement. It is therefore possible to replicate all of the steering modes of the real crane, including crab steering. Out on the cranes etc. superhighway, and the crane rolls very smoothly. And you can see that also the sprung suspension works really well. The performance of the chassis is also really good if we set the steering. And you can see that the crane achieves a tight steering angle really nicely. Let's now move on to site and set the crane up. And we begin in the usual way by pulling out the outrigger beams, which are two-stage. As you can see, the pads have got a nice pinning system so that they are offset for transport. And by resetting the pin position, you can centralise the pad. On the downside though, the outriggers are probably the weakest feature of the model, and that's because there's not really enough downward movement of the pistons. So the minimum you need to do is to put some spreader plates under the pads, and these ones are made by NZG, but they're not included with the model. Even with these, you can't really get the crane high enough to pose wheels free. Next we change the handrails to working mode, and that includes fitting one at the back of the crane. Now we'll go ahead and raise the boom, and it is quite stiff to raise it up. That's because it's plastic, even though it does have a locking screw to lock the ram in position. The counterweight on the crane is excellent, and it replicates the Vario ballast system of the real crane. So you can either position it outwards for maximum lifting capacity, or if you want to achieve the most compact arrangement, you can raise up the markers and use those to position the counterweight at the inward position. You can see the reason for doing this if we go to the back of the crane, and you can see that the lifting points have an inward and outward position. Okay, we'll go for the outward position and load up the counterweight, and it's detailed and complex on this model, with many of the plates being of a different design. They are very well made, so they all do stack nicely, and in theory you could display the model with different combinations of counterweight, although you would have to be careful how you hang the ballast from the crane. Here we're loading the counterweight up to the maximum, and that includes 2 cheek weights. With the counterweight stacked, we can rotate the crane around, and with some careful manipulation we can get the jacks of the crane over the lifting points of the counterweight. Once we're in position, we can lower the jacks by using an Allen key that's supplied with the model, and then you can rotate in the lifting points so that they clip in under the lifting lugs on the counterweight. If you've practiced a few times and are skillful, you can then raise the counterweight by using the jacks. And then because the counterweight is properly attached, you can rotate the crane. The winch on the model works well because it's spring-loaded and has a positive locking brake. Another nice feature is that each of the telescopic sections has 3 separate locking points for different extensions. To extend the telescope, you just pull out the sections from the top, and they pull out smoothly until you reach the point where the locking clip engages. And then you can just keep repeating the process until you get the extension of the boom that you want. If you feel sorry for the operator and you want him to have a nice sleep, you can tilt the cab, and then you can wake him up by pushing it back down. Let's attach the fly jib, and it's time for a tip. Sometimes the gaps are too small to use the supplied tools to fix the nuts and bolts. So here we're using some plastic putty to hold the nut while we carefully screw the bolt into it. Once you've got the nut fixed on the end, it's then easy to tighten up the bolt. The fly jib attaches to the axles in the boom head, and the only advice is to line up the holes as well as possible before trying to insert the bolts. There are 4 nuts and bolts needed to make the connection, and once they're all done up, it's nice and strong. Here you can see that the guide wheel has been opened up in order to run the hoist line, and it's also good that there's a proper single line hook supplied to go on the end of the fly jib. The model is configured with the ratchet version of the fly jib, so by undoing a nut and bolt, You can adjust the angle of the fly jib from straight to one of 2 tilted positions, and then you secure it using a nut and bolt. This is a typical high quality and robust model from NZG. It's got a high metal content and it's solidly made, and the detailing is really nice. For the most part, the functionality also works well, and this crane looks particularly good in the limited edition colours of Felbermayr. All things considered, it's got enough to be rated as excellent.